Hello, I'm Michael Kraft. On behalf of the Omega staff community, I'm pleased to welcome you to today's conversation. It's an Omega conversation with Seane Corn and Susanna Barkataki, exploring what does it take to belong, brave conversations to create inclusion and belonging with yoga. After we introduce our speakers, they'll speak together in conversation, and then near the close of the hour, we'll take questions. If you wish to ask a question at that point, please use the raise hand icon at the bottom of your screen in reactions. The reactions button is at the bottom. First, however, a word about Omega during these challenging times. Like so many of you, the impact of COVID has been profound and often difficult, but we have endured and hopefully are better for it. Omega remains dedicated to its mission of serving healing and transformation for individuals and societies, but we can only do so with your support. One way is to become a member. These Omega-free conversations like this are made impossible in part by our generous members. And to learn more about how you can support it, please visit eomega.org/become a member. And now we are honored to welcome two remarkable influencers, change activists, and internationally respected yoga teachers. Seane Corn is an internationally acclaimed yoga teacher, best-selling author, and public speaker known for her social activism, impassioned style of teaching, and raw, honest, and inspired self-expression. Over her 25-year teaching career, Seane has created many instructional DVDs, including her groundbreaking series, The Yoga of Awakening, and she has been featured on over 40 magazine covers and in countless media outlets. Seane is author of Evolution of the Soul, Awaken to Love Through Raw Truth, Radical Healing and Conscious Action. Suzanna Barkataki is a teacher, inclusivity promoter, and yoga culture activist. Rooted in her Indian and British background as an immigrant to the US, she has a deep experience of race and culture-based violence, and she's learned to use these experiences as tools for liberation. Susanna is the author of the recent Embrace Yoga's Roots, Courageous Ways to Deepen Your Yoga Practice. It's a profound book, and these are two profound teachers. Please join me in welcoming both Seane and Susanna.
Michael, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be able to have this conversation. And Susanna, before I have a moment just to say hi to you, I do want to take a moment to say hi to everyone who's here. Thank you so much for being a part of this. But also, this is a very full circle moment for me because I have been a part of the Omega community for, I don't even know how long, many years, a couple of decades. And to be able to introduce you in this way here, Susanna, to this community, it just feels really good to my heart, as they have always been so incredibly supportive of the work I've done, especially when I was a younger teacher. And it makes me really happy that you are a part of the Omega family and that we're doing this talk about your book here at this time. So Omega, thank you. And Susanna, you, my friend, this, you know how I know that a book is really good and it's something that I will return to again and again? I didn't realize it until I pulled this book off my shelf. It's got food all over the cover and in the pages. And for a moment I was like, oh God, I can't show everybody this book because it's got food all over it. But to me, that is a sign of a book that I go to again and again in my most just quietest, intimate moments. And so, Susanna, thank you for writing Embrace Yoga Roots. It's an amazing book, and I am so grateful to you for putting this out into the world. So, hello, my friend.
Hello, and hello, everyone who's here. And Omega, thank you. I was like tearing up a little bit when you introduced me because it is such an honor to be here, and one that I don't take lightly. And I'm really, really grateful for you, Seane, and all the work that you've done through these times, and for Omega and hosting and pushing these thought-provoking conversations. So thank you for having me.
Yeah. Well, you know, it really does take a community of support. This work, we come to this work and it can be isolating and lonely, and there's a lot of pushback. It can be very intense. And so when we find community that uplifts, supports, shares resources, talents in different ways, it allows us to exhale just that much more so that we can continue to persevere. I hope that you have found that, Susanna, because that has certainly been my experience over the years. And I'm hoping that you're finding that as you're coming to this work in the really, just in the forward moving way that you are. I hope you're finding support.
Absolutely. Yes, so much support. In fact, I mean, it's been overwhelming and inspiring to see how, and I always knew this would come one day. You know, you recently published a book as well. It's like once it's out in the world, it takes on a life of its own. And really, it's about everyone, like everyone here listening to this conversation and the way that we're living our yoga and our practice and sharing that.
Yeah. Well, really, my first question to you, and it's often a question I ask to a lot of people these days before we launch into all the minutia of our work and our thoughts, our careers, our community. It's just really, how are you doing? How are you? How's your family? How's everything been in this really complicated time that we're in? You know, are you okay?
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'd love to ask you the same after I answer. And also for folks listening to reflect for yourself, like, really, how are you doing? Because there's like the answer that I would normally give. And then there's the real, like, taking a pause and checking in. And, you know, up until like 2-3 weeks ago, I would have said, I'm good. I'm okay. But the length of the pandemic, working in, you know, bringing awareness to racial justice and difficult conversations, questions around how we respect the roots of yoga, holding like the cultural, kind of a cultural view and presence at the same time as just like day to day. It's been a lot, and it just caught up with me. And so the honest, true answer is I'm really tired. And so I've been taking a lot of naps, going to bed really early, rekindling my love of fiction and reading a lot of great fiction. And, you know, you think too, as yoga teachers, or I thought about myself, like, I got this down. I can handle a little bit of stress and anxiety and all of that. But the truth is, it doesn't make me less of a practitioner to realize that, oh, I really need to turn back into my yoga practices now. It can make me more of one. And so I was feeling a little nervous about sharing that, but because there is a call for me to step down a little bit, take some breaks, take some rest. And the beauty is I can do that because I know what practices to call on, like yoga nidra or meditation. And now there's a community of us. And so I don't have to carry the work that I'm doing alone. There are so many others, including folks listening to this conversation, and many, many others who can do it as well. So I'm going to be taking a good amount of rest through the end of the year. That's how I'm really doing.
When does that start for you?
End of this month.
Oh, that's good. So you have to just kind of just pace yourself until you can get to that point where you can take that exhale and turn in. I think it's important for people to hear. These are really complicated times in that they are unpredictable on so many levels, that the way in which we framed the world prior to the pandemic doesn't really work. We can't predict the way our nervous system is going to respond to this moment. We have been in hypervigilance now for a really, really long time. And every once in a while, we get this burst of light that says, it's almost over. There's light at the end of the tunnel. And for a second, our body exhales until the next day and the next news cycle. And I think for a lot of people, having our nervous systems so accelerated for so long, that fatigue, overwhelm, anxiety, that to me seems like it would be a natural response to what's happening. And so I hope for people who are listening, if that has been your experience, that feels true and right. Like one day you're fine, next day you're just not. And that has to be okay. What yoga does, though, is it gives us the tools of self-regulation so that we can stay present to what is, without thinking that it should be any different. And that is, this moment in time is really asking us to work our yoga in present time and not think that the experience we had yesterday should be applicable for today. And what we're experiencing today is going to be with us tomorrow. So I think your response it's the appropriate one. And I hope everyone else is listening. I hope you're okay. I hope you've got your support, your community, your tools, that you're remembering to work them, that you're looking for ways to be more sustained in your life, whether it's your relationships, what it is that you're reading, the food that you're taking in, whatever it might be. I hope that in the face of anxiety, you're getting help, maybe through therapy or the program, meditation. But I think what you're modeling, Susanna, is that we have to be really present to what is happening right now. Otherwise, we will run the risk of burning out, and then we can't serve our families, our community, or the world around us. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. And how are you doing, Seane?
Yeah, I go in my waves as well. For the most part, really, really well, in that I had been on the road for, almost, 20 plus years of my life. And my nervous system was really set up in a certain way that I could respond to stress in a way that I don't think other people could. It just didn't affect me. But the truth is that I had been really tired for many years. When the pandemic first hit, all I did was sleep. For about 2 months, it took my body to finally recalibrate, because I hadn't been on the same time zone in so many decades that I was just tired. And it helped me to really reflect on what's important and what it is that I value going forward in my life. My work ethic is very intense. It's because of the way I was raised and the environment I grew up in. And it's like, if it ain't broke, you don't fix it. And professionally, everything was in a trajectory that was working just really well. So I didn't know how to stop a train that really wasn't sustainable until the world forced that train to stop. And I realized I wasn't as healthy as I had thought I had been, whether both physically and emotionally. I just have incredible resilience. And all of that was like a big wow. I had no idea. So I was very grateful for the time off and the reflection. And it allowed me to prioritize. Becoming a grandmother was a key milestone in my life, and how I want to show up in my family is very important to me. And so I'm doing very, very well, and terrified of the world that we're living in right now. I feel like we are in this incredible precipice. It's dark. It's very shadowy. A lot of ego, a lot of fear, a lot of oppression, a lot of bias. It is just inflamed. And more people are doing deep inner work than I've ever seen do before. More people are engaging in conversations that they would not have been engaged in just a few years ago, whether it was spirituality or social justice. Young people are asking questions of us, of their elders, in a way that's demanding change. And that gives me hope. So I'm holding the complexity. I'm terrified and excited about what might be emerging going forward. So thank you for asking. I think that that's kind of where I stand. And I wish we can hear from everybody out there, but I hope again that you're all doing okay, and just grateful that we can be here in this conversation. My belief is that, especially as teachers, this is not a time for hierarchy. It is not a time for power over, power under dynamics. This is a time for community and collective conversation. This is a time for all of us to share as humanly and as openly as we can, to be transparent, because it gives permission for all of us to orient towards our humanity without shame or feeling that they're somehow inadequate. And Susanna, I see
Yes,
I see that you're
I just said, I love inviting people to drop how you are in the chat. You could share 2 words, a sentence, let us know. And, that way we get to hear from you a little bit, how you're doing. And I see a few folks are starting, fight or flight, feeling pretty good. It's lovely. And you can keep it coming. And resonate with one another as well. It looks like some folks are just sharing with one another. So
yeah.
welcome you.
Again, fight or flight is the appropriate response to the overwhelm of this moment. It's like when we're experiencing individual or collective trauma, the brain is hardwired to respond out of control, wanting to create safety. And we are anything but in control right now. And so if we don't have like the ability to compartmentalize our life because we're in such an unknown space, fight or flight seems like that seems about right. It's just, what do we do with it? How do we manage it? Yeah. So Susanna, a gazillion questions.
Yes.
What made you decide to dive in? And I know you on a personal level, so I know that this was already a part of the work that you were doing as a teacher for many, many years. This wasn't just coming out of nowhere, but you did decide, there was a moment where you were like, I think it's time I put this into words, and that you actually make it tangible, and you put this together, and plus the workbook also. What made you decide it was time?
Yeah, I think the deciding moment really was, I was coming back from my aunt and uncle's house. My aunt Jatai lives with her husband, who is Bengali, and my aunt is Assamese. These are two parts in the northeast region of India where there's a huge amount of worship of the goddess. And we are just leaving that time of goddess worship and coming into another time with Diwali, of the worship of, or celebration of, light. And so it was around this time of year, probably around 2015. Yeah, I think it was 2015. And we've done this beautiful fire ceremony, connecting to the light within, giving thanks for light in the world. Because for so many practitioners of yoga, a lot of what the practice is connecting to the elements, connecting to nature, to the sun, to the moon, to the stars, to fire, and to harmonizing that within us and around us. And so even though my aunt and uncle would say to me, oh, beta child, I can't go to a yoga studio because I don't fit in, I don't belong. My aunt wears saris all the time. They practice so much yoga all of the time, yoga ethics and the devotion. And so I was leaving the puja, leaving this ceremony, and reflecting on why is it that this depth of practice that I know and I've gotten to experience just through the luck of being born into the family that I was born into isn't what we see in yoga studios, in workshops, in classes? Why is there such a discrepancy and a difference? And at first, it was really just like confusion and kind of trying to understand. And then that did turn into anger and frustration at, I started to see colleagues and friends who, say, for example, were kirtanwalas, who are practitioners of yogic mantra or chanting from within the tradition, and they wouldn't be able to get spots in festivals because the organizers would say, oh, it sounds too authentic, or, you're not popular enough. And so I realized this isn't just coincidence. There's something more at work. And I actually don't think anyone means to do what's happening. I don't think anyone set out to say, oh, we're just going to take one little sliver of what yoga is and then share that with the public. And they don't get all the rest. I think it's just like almost inertia or habit energy. And we, as a culture, didn't know better in the West, really. And so I wrote the book in order to connect these two worlds of like the culture and the depth and the heart of yoga, and an analysis of social conditions that we find ourselves in where we just play out what we know, and to kind of be a wake-up call, to be like your book is covered in food and dog-eared and written in, like for people to come back to. If you're like, hey, so what is cultural appropriation? You could look that up. Or what are some of the other practices that I could bring in besides asana? Oh, right, there's a resource of that in the back of the book. Or what do I say, or how do I address power when power issues come up in my community or studio, and to have it be a reference and a resource. So all of that kind of felt like my ancestors, in particular, my aunt, who's like the matriarch of our family, were writing through me and like channeling these stories out into the world.
I love that, Susanna. You know, I remember when I got a copy of the book and I was going through it and I was reflecting, as being someone who's been such a part of the mainstream, the evolution of the mainstream yoga world. I've seen so much of the diluting of the traditions and this new reclaiming. I've seen so much of the homogenizing and this new awakening of inclusivity that seems to be happening. And I look at you and other leaders like yourself who have been real pioneers in bridging this. In some ways, it almost seemed like it had to go so far out. And in the same way, like when people would say to me, you know, doing yoga in the gym, well, that wasn't really yoga. But a part of me would think, but they're moving, they're breathing. One day, something's going to happen. It could be 5 years, it could be 5 days, but someone's going to say something and it's going to land in their body differently. And it's going to be because of those extra push-ups. It's going to be because maybe there was music playing in the background, which I personally cannot stand. But for that person, maybe it's what brought them into the room. And it feels like our culture needed these little baby steps to tolerate the discomfort in their own bodies, to be ready to go back full circle, to now go in and say, actually, what is yoga? Where did it come from? What are these roots? What are these traditions? How do I make sense of this? Whether I'm a Christian or a Jew, or able-bodied, or whatever it might be. How do we now go in and unpack this? And I think that that's what your book did really well, is that it acknowledged and honored the fact that here's where we are in our yoga pathway here in the mainstream yoga collective. And this is the moment that we have to dig even deeper and understand and appreciate the roots, to let it ground us and sustain us. Otherwise, the practice can't thrive. It'll be colonization all over again. And so your work has been really important. How has it been received since you put this out there? How have you felt in the mainstream yoga community in this pushback a little bit, or rather the invitation for people to come into the roots with more respect?
You know, I think about how many people I talk to who say, you know, I'm in an older body now, and so I haven't felt like I could be welcome in yoga spaces the way I used to be, or I have an injury, or I have a larger body, and I'm not sure that it's okay for me to go to practice. And so much of the blocks that I face, that friends of mine face, that colleagues face, probably you hear this all the time, Sean, as a yoga teacher teaching regularly. It's like all of those things are not what yoga is truly about. Yoga is here for everyone. It didn't come to any one person. It didn't come to any one religion. It came through. It's a gift for humanity. And we're so lucky to have been able to receive it. And for the teachers in the Indus Valley and the Saraswati River Valley, you know, in what's now the subcontinent of India and Pakistan, that they cultivated and codified and organized this practice. And so, yeah, I get excited about it because there's absolutely nothing wrong with asana. A wonderful, strong, like power yoga asana, you know, years of that it can be wonderful. And I think it's more like, and doesn't have to be that way. And there's more if you want to explore more. And so when I'm able to, and when my message is received as that, and this is great, and there's more, I feel like people are much more open. When it's perceived as, you know, you're saying that there's cultural appropriation and I'm appropriating, so I don't know if I should be allowed to teach yoga because I'm white. What do you think, Susanna? Right? It's then the reception, it's like we're already almost adversaries. And I don't see it that way. I actually think that's a really interesting question, and not one that anyone else should be able to answer for someone, but only someone could answer for themselves. I mean, I do know what I believe, and I run teacher trainings where everyone is welcome, right? So you could probably guess what I believe, that this is a practice for all of us. But for the most part, I think there's been curiosity, there's been interest, there's been a great desire to go deeper in one's own svadhyaya, one's own personal inquiry, and to bring that into engagement in the world that has been far greater than I've been at this for about 20 years, not that long, but a little while. And for the first 15, 16, 17 years, no one was really paying attention to what I was saying. And now people are. And I think we're just at that right moment where enough events came together that people are ready to have these challenging conversations, and to also do it with love and with connection. And that's what I hope the book does. And I wrote it intentionally to be kind of conversational, like we're sitting together on a sofa, exploring this, having a conversation over a cup of chai or tea or coffee, whatever you want to drink. Mine will be chai. And then, there's no absolute authority, like you were saying, that I hold. I have a perspective, and I'm offering a perspective from being Indian and British and growing up in the United States, that has felt like it's not been centered. And we all come from our different perspectives. And so it's more like a way of getting to be more intimate, be more connected, and learn about and know one another, as we all want to know this practice better.
Yeah, I think often about, perspective, like to your point of that, as a Polish Jewish woman, there are historical beliefs, prejudice, biases, traumas that live in this body, and some scars, these deep grooves of perception that influence the way in which I experience the world. Influence, you and I could have the exact same experiencing happen in front of us, but you, based on your own samskaras, me based on mine, we're going to experience it completely differently. And I think that that's why what happens, and I'll speak in my own experience, I like to do that rather than make it generalized for everyone. But in the beginning of my yoga practice, it was all about my body, like just wanted to feel healthier, quit smoking, quit drinking, things happened, but I had no interest in spirituality. I had no interest in healing, and healing what? I didn't identify as someone with trauma. But after some of the tension wore off my body and some of that control decreased, I started to feel emotions. And suddenly I'm now pulling back the veils, and I'm investigating trauma. But still the trauma is limited to my experience, the trauma I experienced as a child. It's individual. It took years before the samskaras, the new patternings in my body, became embedded, where I could comfortably, when someone would say, "You're a racist," if this went through the lens of me 10 years ago, I would have said, "How dare you say that? Don't you see the work I do in the world? Don't you see how I show up?" There would have been no part of my body that could have embraced that as an inquiry, as a yoga practice. Bias, discrimination, stereotyping, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, ableism, racism, all of them, et cetera, et cetera. These beliefs live in the body and have to be unpacked, disseminated like everything else. And I think that we're at this really interesting moment in our collective yoga practice, where within the mainstream, people are now willing to say, all right, I am racist. This is in my body. This is old information that is dug in. How do I unpack this? Rather than personalizing it, rather than being like, well, I'm a bad person because I have these feelings. No, these feelings are cellular. We can't not have them, but we have them in different ways based on our upbringing, based on our education and our religion. And that's why I thought that your book, it posed these questions that I'm hopeful more and more people are now willing to look at this as not as separate from our yoga practice. Social justice is not separate. Issues of justice are not separate if we believe in collective liberation. But it's messy and uncomfortable and humiliating. And so I get why a white yoga teacher would come to you and ask you questions about becoming a yoga teacher and get defensive rather than taking that exhale and saying, well, what does it mean? And how do I show up? And is there balance? And I still think our conditioning is so much so that we push back on that which offends or is difficult. And that's why I think the work that you're doing is revolutionary. And I think it should be in every yoga teacher training that exists. This level of inquiry, it's a level of yoga that will bring all of us in different ways to our knees and wake us up to what real social change from the inside out could look like.
Yes. Thank you, Shauna. And I'm just seeing, Fernanda said, when she saw us talking or saw me talking about white supremacy and standing up against systemic oppression as part of ahimsa, for Fernanda, it was a great day because that was a turning point in understanding and being sure this is part of everyday life and everyday decisions. And so that piece, right? It's like very much in the yoga philosophy that we can turn to for the deeper questions. Someone else asked about, like, if we're struggling, really struggling with all of this disconnection, with being online, with not being able to be in person, with grief of losing people, with anger at political systems that are clearly not serving so many of us. For me, it's going back into yoga ethics and practices like that are deceptively simple, like ahimsa, like non-harm, like satya, truthfulness, like brahmacharya, energy management, and really inquiring and living and being with those practices in my own life, like for me with my kiddo or with my family, but also ahimsa, for example, as interrupting harm wherever I find it. So for me, that's learning more about environmental justice, taking more care in what I'm doing in the world. That's been an area that I haven't spent as much time learning about because I've been learning other things. With Satya, it's like listening deeply to others, not just cultivating my own truths, but like you said, in terms of all of those places of privilege, because I have them too, as a light-skinned Indian person, as a cis person, there are ways that I need to listen and pass the mic or, like pass the whole stage if I can to other folks who our society hasn't really heard through into the depth of their truth. And to me, that's exciting because we're kind of at the beginnings, it feels like, of really getting there's so much more here. And that my truth doesn't have to be in competition with anyone else's. So yeah, that just got me very excited.
Yeah. And I'm curious for everybody who's listening. I mean, when we get into conversations and we're dealing with oppression and power and privilege and those are trigger words for a lot of people, white supremacy culture, we personalize. And so I'm hoping that you're all breathing into your body and your experience, checking in with yourself, like how those words land. And if you start thinking like, well, that's not yoga, I'm white supremacy, like how is that yoga? Or talking about politics or racism. And yet anything that impacts the liberation of any soul, we have to orient towards. And if there's injustice or inequity, we must, to your point, it's ahimsa. We must disrupt the harm. And that includes the ways in which we're participating in that harm. And that's when, the very first sutra, yoga is now. That's when it really kicks up the dust, because it's one thing to point our fingers out and say, oh, you need to change, legislation needs to change, policy, politicians, when actually the real change needs to happen internally. And that gets uncomfortable and humbling. So we have to learn we have to understand how we can apply the principles, the yamas and the niyamas, for example, to social justice terminology that includes looking at human rights or environmental justice or food justice or indigenous sovereignty, for example, or disability rights, and asking yourself, how is that yoga too? And how has that conversation not been a part of my life, and why? And if it's not a part of my life, am I actually contributing to this separation that is impacting the happiness, health, and wellness of others? So like, this is big yoga that we're up against right now, both terrifying and illuminating, humbling and hopeful. And so I want to ask you, Susanna, like, this goes back to what the theme of this entire conversation is about, which is belonging. You know, we're talking about yoga, interdependency, connection. We're looking at the ways in which the traditions of yoga and contemporary life experience are colliding together, that there is diversity that exists in this world. There is difference. And yet yoga tells us again and again that we are the same. We are the same. And that has to get unpacked so that we can honor the difference and understand what that sameness actually means. And so I'm wondering for you, what is this idea of belonging? What do we mean when we talk about belonging? And what can we do within ourselves to recognize and take accountability for the ways in which we actually separate and participate to that non-belonging?
I come to this question, I just want to say, as being a mixed race person, you know, my mom is British and my father is Indian. And I came into the world at a time when I wasn't wanted. And when, you know, my parents couldn't find anyone to marry them. I was wanted by my parents, but not by the rest of their community, who said things like, you'll have to adopt because you'll have half-breeds. And so I'm really familiar with the feelings, the sensations, the bodily experiences, the looks of not belonging. And I would imagine for a lot of folks listening, maybe your story is different than mine, but there's ways that, you know, it could have been like something in the schoolyard or something a family member said, but there's so much tenderness there when there are experiences of not feeling loved or not feeling worthy or not feeling welcome, just as you are. And so for me, when I turn towards the practices of yoga, and really, like, this is what I love about a kind of full expanded, which is, you know, beyond the scope of what we can go way into today. But like, if you look at Samkhya philosophy, if you look into yoga philosophy, which there are many wonderful teachers of this, then, and many books, then at our core, we're always already good. We always already belong. And the illusions of samskaras, like you were talking about, or Maya, you know, it's just a cover over that opportunity for wholeness and coming home to ourselves. And that feeling, you know, and I can tell even in how, as I'm talking to you all, it's like as I describe what it was like, there's still the tenderness there. Like, it hasn't fully gone away. It's still there. Little Susanna, like, I'll send her love later today, you know, and spend a little time with her. And because of reconnecting to these practices, I feel like it's like a remembrance of like, I am whole. I am, you know, I belong to my family. I belong to the community, and you all belong to me, right? We're different. And I want to actually hear about all the ways that we're different and the differences in our upbringings and our backgrounds and our family systems. And we're connected to one another. And the real time or way that it like dropped down and anchored in I think it's in my body. It feels like it's like in my gut actually, is when I realized that I had to belong to myself first. And that's what yoga offered me was through the practice, actually through physical yoga asana, but not for me necessarily really active asana, more like slower contemplative, like being in balasana in child's pose, or even prone on my belly, taking a prone shavasana, that in those moments, I could come back to like a kind of self-tending or self-holding, an invitation for folks, if you want to like actually place a hand somewhere on yourself and just like, yeah, I belong to myself, and to explore that, what that means for you. So the second part of your question now, I think
what can we do within ourselves to take accountability, responsibility for the ways in which we create separation, and as a result, perpetuate people not feeling that they belong?
Oh yeah, yes, because all those years when I was feeling separate and feeling like I didn't belong and feeling rejected, guess what I did, right? Turn around and pass that along. I was mean to my little brother, who's now much bigger than me. Not so kind with my friends, controlling. And I have compassion too for that person, that, that myself that was acting in those ways, because I didn't have that awareness of self-belonging, or in those moments where I didn't feel actually ready yet to say I belong, like even these parts of me that have made bad choices or have done unkind things, I don't want to belong in that yet, to just have compassion. And so I think that is really the important piece, is starting with ourselves, because from that place of, for me, it shows up in a lot of humor, like just, oh, okay, Susanna, you messed that one up again. Like you totally ran ahead and started doing things without consulting the people you were supposed to consult. And I just have to kind of laugh at myself and say sorry, and then and come back around to building and engaging in relationship. That's personally. On a systemic level, it's looking at the places where I may not even be aware that I've caused separation, that I've said, like, example that I know you've thought about as well. But when I was teaching, say, like goddess yoga classes or prenatal yoga classes, and I talk about pregnant women instead of pregnant people, then I'm actually causing separation, because there could be a pregnant person who wants to come and take that class, or someone who relates as a goddess who doesn't relate with the gender of women, that wants to come and have that experience, but I've just separated off because of my own lack of awareness or my own lack of forming connection with communities and people beyond my own experience. And so really being willing to, for me, a lot of it is like humbleness, and then learning, and being willing to own when I've messed up.
Yeah, it's key. And having a good sense of humor about it. It's just like, it's not like it's when it's going to happen, not if. It's going to happen that we're going to mess up in doing this work. So when it happens, it's like, all right, there that is, what was hard for one of my, like, I would say like a trigger in my life, especially in my youth, was I don't come from a strong educational background. I didn't go to college. I didn't have some of those opportunities. And so if there was like a traumatic theme in my head, it would be that I'm not smart enough. Like I'm that I don't take in information the way other people do. And when the conversation related to social justice first came up, the sense of inadequacy, embarrassment that I would feel in my body because I didn't know these terms. And then I would feel defensive. Then I would feel argumentative as a way to try to combat the truth, was that I was embarrassed, that was like a core wound within myself. Once I came to terms with that, now when I go up against something and I feel that defensiveness, it's like, oh, honey, you're just embarrassed. You got this. You're okay. Ask the questions. And be present to that. But that's part of the unpacking of yoga, these beliefs that live in our body that actually stop us from from asking questions, from learning and listening, from knowing like what our own limitations are and not letting those limitations actually influence the potential for transformation and for growth. And so that's like when I want people who are listening to know that this is complex, it's deep, it's psychological, it's physiological, and the work is utterly, absolutely necessary if we're going to move this needle and create a world, one in which we've all prayed for, which is liberation for all, peace for all, equality, justice, all the things that we say. But you say that, you put that out into the universe, you better be willing to do the work to recognize your own complicity, your own accountability. And that's what's going to help us to belong. I have known that when I have gone into situations, learning, listening with humility, I am embraced in a very different way than when I go in with entitlement or arrogance. And so the onus is on me to approach each situation with a level of curiosity, openness, and humility. And so that's what I invite everyone who's coming into this work to do. You're going to mess up. And if you can have a good sense of humor about it and be like, well, there that is, then it's going to help all of us feel that we can ask questions. And I think it's in that we start to feel that we belong. I have one more question for you that I saw come up in the chat, and then I want to flip it back over to the group. But I think it's an interesting one in the digital age. And I'm not going to be able to scroll back, so I apologize. I don't know the name of the person who said this, but it's something about belonging in real time versus kind of digital time. Because of COVID and everything that's happening, there's a lot of isolation. And a lot of us are losing, including myself, social skills that really came, like my social skills have really like diminished because of this time being alone and being in isolation. Some people are okay with it. Some people are not. And it can really impact a sense of belonging when we don't have access to community the way that maybe we once had. Do you have any thoughts in belonging in this digital age when isolation is just kind of the way that it is right now? Like, what do we do with this?
Yeah. And I have so much empathy for this question because, like you, so much of my life shifted and changed and has been very insular. And I remember when the pandemic first started, walking with my kiddo who was like 6 at the time, and he would just like start to cry for no reason. And then we'd have to stop on the walk and like sit down, and he'd be like, I hate this virus. I hate not being able to be with my friends. And that raw, real expression, just because we're in bigger bodies doesn't mean we don't feel that way. So I let myself really feel it and grieve what I've lost and what we've lost and what we continue to lose. I think that's the hard part as well, as it's an ongoing and unknown and uncertain time. And then for me, I was living in a place where not a lot of people shared my kinds of perspectives in general in life or on yoga. And so most of what was around me I wasn't able to access the kinds of practices and the folks I wanted to be practicing with anyway. I've moved now, so I'm in a different place. But I say that to say, like, I had moved there like 4 years before the pandemic started. So I was already in the practice of, if I saw someone online or met someone in some way, like in an environment who I connected with on a value level, saying, hey, can we set up a Zoom chat? Hey, can we set up a phone call? And really connecting on those value levels where we had shared values and making the effort to show up, to be in relationship despite the distance, despite the fact that we couldn't be in person. And so that's really served me so deeply in terms of my own mental health and knowing that I can count on friends who, we're never going to live in the same place, most likely, but we have each other's back and we're there. The phrase I like to use with people, I'll share this, and if it resonates for you, please take it, is like, in any mood, in any time, no matter if you're like crying on the floor like my little kid was, or you're really joyful and excited, contact me, call me, text me, and I'll respond. Might not be right away, but I will get back to you. And that has gone so far to help me deepen true relationships. It's simple, and there may be other things that work for other people, but that really has worked for me. That, and in slow, steady ways, beginning to come back out to connect with people in ways that feel okay for my nervous system. So outside, masked, cautiously, with folks who are vaccinated, right? So, and then calibrating for what feels okay, what doesn't feel okay, and making those adjustments. But really finding creative ways to connect.
Yeah, thank you for that, Susanna.
Yeah.
I want to check in with the student or the people who are here and see if there's any questions. There's one here from Eileen. Is there a difference between resonating digitally and resonating real time? Very interesting question. But I would love to hear what you had to say on that, Susanna.
When I sit in Sangha, in meditation community, and I have for about 15 years in person, and now I sit digitally online. And the biggest difference is my own distractedness. Like I'm sitting and I want to pick up my phone, or I want to clean something. When I can overcome that and drop in, which takes some focus, the energetic feeling of deepening in meditation together is the same for me. So that's my experience, but the barrier to entry to that is a little higher for me online, because I have to kind of it's like I have to make my own temple, right, in my own home space. And sometimes I'm better at doing that than others. You might have a different experience. I'm curious for you, Seane, about that, about resonance.
At first, it was very difficult for me because I'm super sensitive just to energy, and that includes technology. Mm-hmm. And I rely so much on feedback. Mm-hmm. But once I understood technology and got more confident with just how to manage whatever, just this world, and that was taken out of my head, I realized that I can absolutely 100% resonate without even seeing anybody on the other side, can still tap in. The difference, I'm actually less tired than when I'm in person. For whatever reason, the not physically being in the presence has actually given me more energy, if you will. Rather than take energy. That was something I did not expect, that I would actually find some parameters and boundary and safety between energetically. I never thought that would happen. But it took time. It took time and practice. Crystals, you should see the amount of shungite and all sorts of things trying to pull the energy away from me. And that is real for certain people are sensitive that way. I don't have a single crystal by my computer now. But in the beginning, you should have seen what the situation was. And so, yeah, I think it's different for everybody who get used to it. But energy is real, resonance is real. And I do believe that we can connect and engage, that this technology in some ways is an incredible gift, because I know that there's people on here who are, living in Italy or India or in Australia that wouldn't perhaps have had access to see us live. And now we can actually engage in a global way that we couldn't before. And I'm grateful for that. Let's see if there's any other questions before, actually, we don't only really have room for one, I think.
I just want to call in Lacey just to offer some compassion, and also note that you're feeling that movement away from censure and finger pointing and blame to compassion. So just really celebrating you in that, and also sending you lots of support and care in your process.
Yeah. Let's see. I think we're okay. Patty is saying, thanking us for making this conversation bigger than race. I hear you both acknowledge the alienation that can happen in yoga based on age, size, flexibility, gender. Yeah, that happens a lot. And God knows over the years, I have been absolutely criminal in that way when we start to talk about social justice. As a white person, that is going to be my immediate orientation in this body, is whatever shame, guilt culturally lives related to race relation. So it elevates to the top of my awareness. And I think that happens a lot in these conversations. And we forget that this level of separation exists beyond race, and that it's, but the pain is equal, whether you're dealing with disability or gender issues or whatever it might be, that is your lived experience, where you experience oppression or denial, that has to be acknowledged. And so it includes gender and sexuality, abilities, being neurotypical, and what that might mean to someone who has difference in that capacity. Like all of it, we have to unpack it. And so thank you for acknowledging that, because it's a big one that I've had to work on personally.
And that's like the heart too for me I've recently been understanding that these things are not separate. And so to heal around racial justice means I also need to heal around gender justice or, body inclusivity. All these different things are not, they're not separate. And so that's the word for that, which was coined by Black feminists, is intersectionality by Audre Lorde conceptually, and then Kimberly Crenshaw. And having a practice of intersectionality, what is that but a yoga practice, right? Of unity, of oneness. And so as we liberate ourselves or help to support others liberate themselves, we're really in that practice of union, of being a vessel for yoga.
And I heard a teacher once say something that always stuck with me, is that you can't be selectively conscious. You either are or you're not. And so when you look at, it's like, well, I'm going to orient towards racial justice because that feels like justice, but animal rights, not so much. Or environmental justice, it'll be fine. It's like, actually, we have to open ourselves up to recognize that it's all interdependent and connected. So you're either conscious or you're not. You can't be selectively conscious. And that one really hit hard because it really forces me to look at, where do I orient towards justice, towards love and compassion? Who gets to hold it, and where do I, kind of push it away? And again, that's when the yoga invites you in to say, like, pay attention. You're the problem. This is the problem. Yeah. So Susanna, thank you so much for this conversation. And I know you're going to lead us out. So I just want to take a moment one more time just to acknowledge your book. You can see the food on there. I'm so embarrassed. Embrace Yoga's Roots. And I highly recommend this. If you are a young teacher, I believe, and when I say young teacher, I mean like a newer teacher, and you're really just diving in, get this book now. Read it, understand it, apply it to your own practice. It will impact you as a teacher going forward. That will make your work relevant to the way in which our world is evolving. And I really want to encourage all of you just to dive in, this and the workbook as well, because that'll make you unpack it in a very different way. So Susanna, thank you for writing this, and to Omega for hosting this. Everybody buy this book. And Susanna, do you want to say some last words and close us out?
I would love to. Thank you, Seane, so much for all you do and how much you are supporting folks like me and others, and just sharing yourself as a gift in the world. And Omega, thank you for hosting us and these conversations and all the wonderful programming that you offer, and the location that we can go to and have retreat or deep learning. So precious. And so I want to invite us as we close to stretch if you would like. I'm sending my arms out to either side or maybe up above. And then you can bring your left and right palm together at your heart. But as they come together, we're going to do this twice. And I invite you to rub your hands together and generate some light, some heat, some energy. And because we practice to offer ourselves growth, wisdom, compassion, I invite you to take your hands and place them somewhere on your body that needs some care. If you're not sure, my teacher Shankarji always would place his hands over his eyes and to rest in that darkness and send the energy to the brain, third eye. And wherever your hands are, maybe if they're on your neck or shoulders, you're giving yourself a little massage. Massaging your temples, and then stretch out once more. Maybe a different stretch this time. My arms are going back behind me a little bit, leaning to one side and then the other. And because we practice for all beings, not just ourselves, I invite you to bring your hands together now after you've stretched a bit and rub them again and call to mind a person, a place, an ecosystem, a being. It's helpful if you can get specific. Could be an animal or someone who needs care right now. And then as you're ready, we'll send that out to them. And on your next exhale, you can bring your hands together. Thank you so much for your presence. Thank you so much for your practice. Thank you all.
Thank you all so much. Mwah. Susanna, be well, and I hope I get to see you sometime soon.
Yes.
It'd be really nice. And everyone, have the most blessed and beautiful day.
Thank you all.